Thanks, Shreya. That was a quick primer over the agriculture sector. Hello, all, and welcome to our next session, Incentivize for Impact, a Policy Perspective. Do we need to incentivize for impact? And what could be a good framework for potential policy support for the sector? I know all of you have a lot of questions on the subject, and we have a really distinguished panel here today to discuss and debate some of these issues. But before that, I'd like to take a minute and thank our session partners. We had the honor of working with Invest India and IVCA as session partners for this session. Thank you, Invest India and IVCA, for helping us put this session together. Let us quickly introduce our stellar panelists. Dear all, I can spend the whole day introducing our stellar speakers, but I do understand the constraint of time and that you would much rather hear from them than from me. I'll try and quickly introduce them. I'll start with Dr. Anupam Ray, Joint Secretary, Public Policy and Research, Ministry of External Affairs. Dr. Anupam Ray succeeded Nagma Malik as the Joint Secretary, PPR, in January 2020. Prior to this, he was India's Consul General in Houston, which also hosted the Howdy Modi event. MEA has been empowered with the task of planning, formulating, and managing India's external relations with other nations to protect and promote national interests in the global stage. The Policy Planning and Research Division is the coordinating point for receiving policy inputs from diplomatic missions, ministries, think tanks, and industry associations. Now coming to Mr. Deepak Bagla, MD and CEO of Invest India. Mr. Bagla is currently Managing Director and CEO of Invest India, the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency promoted by the Government of India. Invest India is also the execution agency for the Government of India Startup Initiative. He's a special invitee on the official bilateral CEOs forum and a member of the Venture Capital Investment Committee of US 1.5 billion fund of funds for startups established under the Prime Minister's Startup India Action Plan. Coming to Mr. Eric Savage, co-founder and CEO of Unitas Capital. Eric has 25 years of investment banking experience. He moved to India in 2007 to help set up Unitas Capital, an impact-focused investment bank, and has led the company in raising almost US dollars 2 billion for various impact businesses. Under his leadership, Unitas Capital has been ranked the #1 Indian investment bank by Venture Intelligence for the past 4 years. Coming to Mr. Gaurav Kapoor, Head of Inclusive Growth and Investments, FCDO, which was erstwhile DFID under the British government. As a parent of CDC Group, British government is one of the largest fund of fund investors in the country. And Gaurav has more than 20 years of experience across investment funds, PVC investments, inclusive corporate development, and policy reform, having lived and worked in India and global markets. Coming to Karen Wilson, Strategic Partnerships, Office of the Secretary General at OCDE. Karen has been working with the OECD since 2009, focused on innovation, entrepreneurship, and finance, including angel investment, venture capital, impact investment, and the role of private finance for sustainable development. In addition to other boards and advisory positions, she serves as an advisory board member of the G7 Business for Inclusive Growth Financing Forum, a board member of the European Venture Philanthropy Association, an advisor to the Impact Investment and Blended Finance Initiative at University of Zurich, and on the Harvard Business School Impact Investment Alumni Steering Committee. Coming to Nishit Desai, founder of Nishit Desai and Associates. Nishit Desai founded Nishit Desai and Associates, a research-based international law firm, in 1990. Today, it has offices in Mumbai, Silicon Valley, Bangalore, Singapore, New Delhi, Munich, and New York. He played a seminal role in structuring several private equity funds, in addition to structuring several domestic venture capital funds. Sir Ramanan Ramanathan, Mission Director, Atal Innovation Mission, Additional Secretary of Niti Aayog. Atal Innovation Mission, as we all know, is a flagship national innovation initiative of the Prime Minister and the Government of India under the Niti Aayog. Its mission, its goals and missions are to establish and promote a vibrant culture of innovation and entrepreneurship nationwide. As the mission director of Atal Innovation Mission, Sri Ramanan has been instrumental to date in the launch and execution of several nationwide innovation and entrepreneurship initiatives. Last but certainly not the least, Shri Rajat Tandon, President of IVCA. Rajat Tandon is the President of IVCA. He is focused on planning, developing, and implementing IVCA's regulatory advocacy activities, while also identifying and solutioning ways for members to maximize their membership experience. His goal is to effectively influence regulatory outcomes in support of the alternate asset class and enable a full spectrum ecosystem from angels to AIFs. So thanks a lot, everybody, for coming here today. Eric Savage would be moderating the discussion, and over to you, Eric.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ranjana. Appreciate very much especially you hosting this event. I think IIC has done an amazing job with this so far. It's been a fantastic conference event so far. Hopefully, we won't ruin it with this panel, but I'm sure we will not, because we have an amazing lineup of speakers. I'd say I'm sure well over 200 years of experience that's relevant to this panel. So just to give the audience an understanding of the flow of what we'll be doing here, each of the speakers will shortly be making some brief comments on what role they think policy can play in improving the impact investing industry, and then we'll go into a kind of free-flowing discussion from there after we hear from Karen Wilson on sharing what the OECD impact investment policy framework is. We do welcome questions from the audience, so please feel free to use the chat or question box to send questions in, and would be keen to answer whatever is on the top of your mind. With that, I'll ask each of my fellow panelists to briefly spend a minute or two talking about the role that we think that policy can play in the impact investing, in impact investing to make it more to make it more effective. I'll ask Dr. Ray to go first.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I seem to be the only diplomat in this list. So the question is, what is a diplomat doing in a forum for impact investing? And I have to say that I told Eric when he tried to draw me onto serious questions in policy making, I told him that my role here is limited to making encouraging noises. The reason I'm here is that the Ministry of External Affairs, which I represent, understands the importance of impact investing in the broader context of taking India forward. It's a part of a major global. It's one of the major channels by which global capital is now flowing, and not just capital. I mean, I think what we are more interested in is ideas, best practices, how to harness the man at the bottom of the pyramid. And I think that's where we think social investment is, or impact investing is important. I'm very glad to be here. We are also here because we want to hear from you about how government can be more responsive. My good friend Deepak is there. I see that I have a colleague from the Niti Aayog too. I'm here actually more to listen and to absorb and to see how we can all work together and make impact investing, the strengths of impact investing play into our national priorities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Ray. I'm sure you'll be able to add a lot more than just encouraging noises. Mr. Bagla?
Thank you, Eric. First, thank you very much for getting us all together. It was an absolute pleasure on behalf of Invest India to partner with you. And Anupam, I think you're being overly humble about it. Everything you do has a huge impact. But basically coming to your question, Eric, on the importance of policy, I think it is a central point. to get that ecosystem, to create that environment, to be able to function and to get investing going. And more so where impact investing is concerned, and more so in a country like India, because if I look at the axes, it could be economic diversity, it could be geographic diversity, it could be every which way. All those axes are present in India. And to be able to join the dots, I think policy plays a very, very critical role. And if I may just give you one instance, as we all know, innovation is at the heart of impact investing, startups and innovation. And just to put it in perspective, Startup India is just about 4 years old, January 2016 when we launched it. India is divided into India has 734 administrative districts, basic geographic districts. Today, because of the specific policy and an initiative by the Prime Minister on Startup India, 569 of those 734 districts have a registered startup. This is the strength where policy can take it deep inside as to where it is. And as Anupam suggested, take the last person and the last mile and get them all involved into this entire beneficial approach. I'm sure we'll discuss more of it as we go forward. But to my point, policy plays an extremely critical role. And we have some excellent examples in India, especially in the past 60 months, to show the results of that policy and how it's taken it forward. Thank you, Eric. Back to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Deepak. Appreciate it and completely agree on the importance of policy. Gaurav, would you like to share your views, please?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. And, India is uniquely positioned to play a global leadership role in impact investments. And as Dr. Ray was saying, there are, and as Deepak also said, India is known for its innovations and frugal innovations. And we've been working with India to take some of these innovations to really create impact in geographies, in other countries as well, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa, for example. So it is really important. And the world is now looking at India to be able to scale up, show the ambition, and drive the world in that ambition. And policy will play a pivotal role in terms of how India succeeds in that ambition, in that sense. And policy has to be intelligent and forward-looking because, it is a nascent sector. And if we have big ambitions of serving the last mile and we want to attract global capital, essentially investors will look at three things from this, a policy framework. So one is, for India, we should have an enabling framework that can attract a lot of capital, actors, different kind of experts, players, types of companies into this place so that we can all be very effective. And for that, one has to look at the regulation, the interplay of regulations that are there. So how can it be more effective and is it best practice? Because, these are all financial investors and they have a choice in which market one can go to. So that's the first one. The second important part of the policy is to ensure that it is inclusive and it creates a level playing field which can continually attract newer actors, newer players, uses the knowledge, technology available, rationalizes compliances, perhaps also safeguards contractually the rights of investors who are, taking a bet, often sitting outside of India and many times, of course, sitting within India. And the third important aspect of it is a consistency and a long-term view because investments are multi-year and predictability is very important for people in that sense. So, and the other thing about policy is that, the effectiveness should be measured in a transparent manner on a periodic basis to make the tweaks and refine it because it is not static. I mean, it is dynamic and there are many things at place. And one helpful way of looking at it is, and we can build on it later on in the course of this panel, is about looking at the whole investment cycle. So money coming in and then all the way being held. And then when it is, returned to investors and looking at all the pain points, the checks and balances and trying to see, how effective they are and how effective they can be. And this is something that's not unique to India. It's for all other countries as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gaurav. I think your first point in particular is an important one to always keep in mind here that, India is really uniquely positioned. It's why I moved here 13 years ago, and India really is the world's laboratory for social innovation, impact investing, and all of this. So I think that there are magnificent experiments going on here that have ramifications for obviously hundreds of millions of low-income people in India, but really across the world. Nishith, would you like to share your thoughts, please?
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. So I think as a lawyer, I see the whole scene as follows. The theme of today's discussion is incentivization of impact investing. The way in which I look at it is at two levels. One is a base level, which every government is obligated to provide to their citizens or otherwise. So that is not incentivization, it is the basic framework. So in that, what I would like to see is availability of law. Now, one of the issues that is also that not availability of law is a problem. Number two, if we can clarify and write our law in a little better language, then many of these laws were written like 50, 70, 80 years ago, I don't know. And it is causing a lot of problems away from the reality, including our tax laws. We all can talk about 1,000 things around. So one, let us streamline the existing framework. That is very important. Second thing is incentivization. Incentivization to me is something more than what you are normally entitled to. That is what is called incentivization. Again, one can have different. So in terms of definitional context, I think, as was mentioned earlier, and I'm sure that Karen will take a look at it and talk to us. But the way in which I simply look at, see, we have identified 17 sustainable goals, okay? So anything that furthers that goal without harming, in fact, the principle was do no harm, now it is doing good, okay? Combining these principles, if any project shows there is impact on one of the 17 sustainable goals, right? In a measurable way, I think that is what would be one way to look at definition context of impact investing. So invest, you should show at least in one of or more of the goals, then how does it impact that particular space. Second thing is innovation. What is innovation? Innovation to me, and there are many other ways to define, all of you can define, the way in which I would define innovation would mean to find a solution to a complex problem through an unprecedented mechanism. Okay, that would be my way of looking at innovation. Okay, so where I'm, finding a solution, yeah, you can have jugaad, you can have many other things. It is not necessarily innovation, but it is something unprecedented that is innovative. Okay, whether Me Too company would be innovative or not. So innovation, if you take it, it will not fall. Yes, whether it creates an impact is a different thing. So you've got two measurements: one, innovation, which can have special incentives, and the other one, which is what I would call creating an impact. And for them, you have separate incentivization scheme. So when somebody innovates, I think you can have significant or do something about it. I think that is the way I would really think of a framework. And there are, I think we were going to discuss more. There are two ways of innovation. Again, one incentivization. One, government-based incentivization. But second is private sector. I think if government can facilitate private sector incentivization, I think that would help a lot. And in the process, I think we have to change number of our regulations. I can go on long list, but I don't want to say too much. It is right. Everything starts with investment. Okay. So how do you facilitate at every touch point in investment part of it, all the way up to exit, including the social exchange and stuff like that. So there are a number of different steps to the whole thing. So if we can have a framework which covers entire ecosystem of the impact investing, right from the investment to the exit mechanism. And today we have a lot of benchmarks already available. I see in all the LPs, institutional sophisticated LPs, Now they say that not only you make investment, most of the funds, that you must make 50% of the investment impact, also give measurable results, and there are a lot of things that is already given. I'm not going to get into details. But I believe that if we can think in a little more structured way, then we can come to some kind of environment that facilitates and incentivizes. And finally, funding is no longer a shortage, especially in this kind of thing. At least I see a lot of funding and more orientation is towards impact these days. But if we can improve on our trust law, for example, and particular tax laws, they do not allow trust to invest in the companies. Our CSR, even if we can allow 10% of the CSR pool will be about 25,000 crores a year, I understand. And even if allow 10%, means out of 2% CSR, 0.2% can be allowed in impact investing with the definitional criteria that I just laid down. It would help a lot, And number three, our social venture fund scheme is there in SEBI, which again is little not working well. We have to find some of those things. Grants, to take grants again is a little problem. How would income tax department treat grant? It as an income, or it will treat it as capital and stuff like that. So there are many other issues we can go into detail at this point in time. I would not go into each of them right now, but I think time has come to put together framework covering the government sector as well as the private sector put together. We can create an ecosystem that will bring about impact not only in India but in the world as well. And I'm seeing so many funds that are now coming up to innovate not only for India, they are in India, but for the world as a whole. I think I will stop here.
Great. Thank you very much, Nishit. I think you gave a good overview, and you brought up some topics that we'll dive down deeper into on the CSR side and social venture funds and whatnot as we go through this conversation. Mr. Ramanan, would you like to share your views?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Before I talk about impact investing, and I think others have touched base on that, I'd like to first emphasize on the word impact. We want to create impact. And what sort of impact we have to create? We want to create socio-economic impact in our country, a country which is 1.3 billion people. We still have, we are one of the fastest growing economies of the world, barring the COVID-19 crisis. We have what they call as a demographic dividend, which is the envy of many a country, with 65% of our people under 35 years old. And we have a fast changing technology landscape across the world. Technology is becoming affordable, accessible, available, and advanced. And so when you have a combination of these three, and then you have challenges of the sort of challenges that India has at this point in time, with 22% of our country still below the poverty line. We have 715 districts, out of which 115 are aspirational districts, which are at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of basic education to healthcare, access to education, access to affordable housing, clean drinking water, sanitation, and so on. And then you have a 44% agri-economy base. And we have 4,000 towns and small cities with only 8 tier 1 cities, and everybody trying to flock to the 8 tier 1 cities for their lives and livelihood. We have major challenges. And these major challenges can only be addressed when we use technology, we use a fast growing economy, and we use this demographic dividend to spur innovation and spur entrepreneurship across the length and breadth of the country to be able to address it. And thereby create startups and create entrepreneurial initiatives that's going to drive and bridge this economic divide and the digital divide that we have across the country. Only when we do that, we are going to be able to create a sustainable impact. And I think Nishit Desai rightly brought out that when we are talking of innovation today and we are talking of entrepreneurship, how do you bring the sustainable development goals into sharp focus? The COVID-19 crisis has been an unprecedented one in terms of its impact. A simple virus has paralyzed nations, disrupted supply chains across the world, disrupted supply chains in India, and has created grievous loss of lives and livelihoods for the migrant population. So how do we, at this point in time, if we do not address in a COVID-19 world and a post-COVID-19 world, the issue of socio-economic progress and bridging the digital divide, and thereby implying that we don't boost social innovation in a major way, otherwise this is not a sustainable growth that the country is going to have or the world is going to have. And therefore, it is very important to bring together policy that enables all of this. Government policy is very important. How does it incentivize, as Nishit Desai, is it going to incentivize not just the startups or the financial part, but the entire research, technology, innovation part that is required in these rural districts, in hilly districts, coastal districts of India? And how do you address the 600,000 villages that are out there in the country and which are still not getting the benefit of all this advanced innovation that the tier 1 cities are having? So this is a very relevant time, probably a watershed moment accelerated by the COVID-19 crisis that we have to address. How are we going to take social innovation and how we are going to take impact investing to the next level? Because only in the furtherment of this is economic progress sustainable and addressable. So with that, we'll leave it for the further discussions. But that's why from the government point of view, or from Niti Aayog's point of view, the Atal Innovation Mission is focused on many of these, and we are encouraging social innovation in a very big way through our community innovation centers, as well as through the Atal New India challenges that we have launched with various ministries.
Great, thank you, Mr. Ramanan. It's certainly an important point that we need to be incentivizing innovation in addition to the impact investment. Rajat, would you like to share your views?
Sure, Eric. Thanks a ton, and really glad to be on this particular panel. Well, from an IVCA perspective, I can just let you know that our key focus areas are around onshoring the offshore and also building domestic capital pools. When I say that, what it means is basically saying that, what's the capital in domestic area which we can get, and international capital which can be easily coming into investments, not only in the early stage to growth stage companies, but also in domestic impact investment space, because that becomes a very important area right now. We believe that international capital follows and favors a strong domestic ecosystem. So once the domestic guys puts in money, the international person kind of it instills confidence and gives more opportunities for international money to come in. And I think from this viewpoint, IBC has been simultaneously working on strengthening this particular domestic capital base, as well as looking at pain points of the international LPs and GPs in terms of investing in India. And I think we've been working, while there are a lot of commercial and regulatory issues which we take up from larger context of overall investments. But we've seen that today impact has also become super important, and I think that's why working across on those fronts. On a few domestic investment issues that we raise are from the perspective that money coming from outside gets favorable environment in the country. And I think, we've been working very closely with DEA, and I think, would really thank their support, because once we mentioned about onshoring the offshore, this was a buzzer point with DEA, as well as the policymakers. And and I think, Nishit Bhai, we work very closely with you to make sure that some of the requirements of the industry on the policy side do make a difference, because at the end of the day, we don't want any frequent changes in the policy area. We want it to be stable. And I think I'm happy to discuss some of the issues which we've put forward, during the course of the conversation. Back to you, Eric.
Great, thanks, Rajat. You touched on a very important point in terms of domestic capital coming into the market, incentivizing global capital to come. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to dig a little deeper into that. Karen, would be great to have you share kind of the learnings from OECD on the impact investment policy framework side.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric. And also thank you for the organizers for inviting me to be here with you all today. It was, I think, 2 years ago that I was there in person when the GSG summit took place in India. And I also had a chance to join this summit then. So pleasure to be back. Sorry it's virtual, but at least it's possible virtually. I wanted to provide a global perspective, but I'm going to be echoing a number of the comments that have been made already. As many of the speakers said already, the imperative for impact has never been higher. COVID has supercharged that need, increasing inequality, social issues, economic issues, environmental issues. And now more than ever, we need new solutions. Innovation is at the heart of that. We also need integrated economic models. And as many of the previous speakers pointed out, these are all areas in which India is very well positioned and has a huge opportunity. In terms of the role of policy, actually it's multifaceted and it cuts across different parts of government, which is why sometimes it can be hard to get a hold of it. depending on which side you're looking at, which aspect you're looking at. So what we tried to do 2 years ago, and it's summarized in our most recent OECD publication on social impact investment that came out last year, is to develop a framework, a policy framework that looks at 3 dimensions. One is the role of policymakers. The role that everybody knows is that of market regulator. Of course, the policymakers play a very important role in regulating the market and setting policies, and a number of the speakers already mentioned that. But government can also be a market facilitator, and a number of the speakers spoke about the ways that policymakers can do that. But governments also are a market participant. Sometimes they are an active player in the market, and we see many examples of that in impact investing in other countries around the world. Then governments can also target different parts of the market. So they can play different roles, but they could also target, the most common would be the enabling environment, setting the regulatory framework, working on legislation, etc. But they can also directly target the supply side of the market, which is a very common area for impact investing that policymakers intervene. The demand side of the market, which unfortunately is not as actively pursued as the supply side. And very importantly, the intermediary part of the market, in which there's a big lack of policy support, and probably that's where it's most needed to connect supply and demand. As some other speakers mentioned, having the whole ecosystem for impact investing is really important. And so the government can play a very important role in helping to build that ecosystem, starting with the enabling environment, but working on supply, demand, and intermediaries to make sure that the whole system is working well. So the other dimension are the actual tools, the existing tools in the toolbox that policymakers can use. And in the OECD policy framework, we group these tools into 4 different buckets. We call the first bucket steer, and this is where the government is really setting a strategy, a national strategy for impact investment, or they're organizing within the government to have some sort of cross-ministry role, and other ways that they're trying to help steer from a national level or a regional level impact investing strategies. The other is rule, which again is the more common regulatory role that governments play. The other is finance, the other bucket, where the government is coming in, providing funds, funded funds, outcome funds, etc. Lots of examples of that, a lot of activity in that area. And the 4th bucket is inform, where the government is helping to support data, research, reports. We already heard a couple of the speakers talk about the importance of measurement and transparency. And here, the government can play an important role in helping support efforts on impact measurement, data infrastructure, etc. So I'll just close my comments for now by pointing out when our first report came out in 2015 called Building the Evidence Base, we didn't do a formal mapping of policies, but at that time I would estimate there were about 20 countries and maybe 40 plus policies in place in countries around the world. What we see 4 years later, when we did the mapping in the report that came out last year, the Impact Imperative for Sustainable Development, we found more than 45 countries with almost 600 policies in place. And this mapping was done during 2018. So already 2 years later, I'm sure that's grown tremendously. So what does this show? It shows that policymakers are aware of the market. They're supportive of the market. They want to help facilitate the market. They're looking for the tools with which to do that. And so I think for market participants, it's important to help raise the awareness, work with policymakers, help them understand the tools in the toolkit, and try to make it easy for them to try to implement some of these policies. We've seen in some countries the policies that have gotten through the fastest have been the ones that are linked to current innovation policies, financing policies, but with a social innovation lens put on it. And I know that India already is very advanced in policies on entrepreneurship and innovation. So I will close with that, but look forward to the further discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I think that's a very helpful framework. And for those of you who haven't seen it, you can go online and find the OECD impact investing framework. And I think it's quite a useful document. The first topic I'd like to dive into is really how do we, and we were involved when the Impact Investing Council was set up 5-6 years ago or so, and as I know, others on the call were as well. And my colleague Mona Kachwaha, who's helping lead our equity fund that we're raising right now, was on the steering committee at IIC at that time when it first launched. And their first topic that they wanted to get into is really saying, how can we get the government or all of us collectively to define impact investing and impact businesses? And this isn't just a theoretical thing to do, because once you can define something, then all of a sudden it can be addressed and policies can be made to help it. And just to give one example of that, if you look at by far the biggest sector of impact investment in India has been in the microfinance sector. And the reason that isn't simply because it's a good business model and it's a scalable one that has a big market. There are actually a number of those, but the driving force for that has actually been policy. It's been the priority sector lending policy. And because you have a clear definition of what is and isn't a microfinance institution, and because the banks are strongly incentivized to lend through priority sector funding to the microfinance sector. The microfinance sector is massive. It's by far the largest microfinance sector in the world. Many of the leading microfinance companies have become either universal banks or small finance banks. And so if we're able to define what impact investing is and impact businesses are, then all of a sudden you could do a number of things. You could allow for the social venture funds under the AIF regulations to have pass-through tax legislation. You could allow for CSR funding to come to these institutions. You could, you could have priority sector lending to come to them. You could make it automatic to extend the external commercial borrowing routes to them, and a number of other things. And so while that was the first priority that was set up by IIC when it was set up, that unfortunately it hasn't come to fruition yet. And would love to get some of your views as to what could allow this to take place. I don't know, Mr. Ramanan, if you have any views on how that could become how we could collectively make that a reality.
Yeah, I think it's a very important and a very relevant question. You have to, when we're looking at definition, I think the moment you put or you're able to define purpose above profit as the basis on which you are going to actually encourage social impact investing. And when I talk of purpose, it's socio-economic purpose rather than pure profit. And this is one of the challenges that is there. I mean, we are supporting, for example, many social innovation related incubators. We have incubators and we have commercially oriented incubators who are just having startups from an economic or a commercial point of view. And then we are now supporting, we're giving a 10 crore grant for incubators who are focusing on social innovation. And but one of the things that is also the challenge for us is we have told them that initially we give a sizable grant of 10 crores to such incubator for the establishment of incubators so that they can encourage startups and they can provide angel funding and seed funding to these startups who are focused on social innovation and so on. One of the challenges we also face is we tell them that you have to be able to stand on your own feet after 5 years. We are supporting you in this initial incubator drive, but you have to be able to find alternate sources of funding, and you should become an enterprise which is able to stand on your own legs and thereby able to generate enough money to keep the startup going. And many of the incubators come back after 2 years or 3 years and say, can we have more funds in order to be able to do that? And that, from my point of view, is not a very sustainable process. So what we have been talking and looking at policies is how do we encourage the private sector more and more in working with these organizations, and what can incentivize the private sector to work more and more. And of course, all the things that you talked about, CSR funding, alternate sources of funding, how do you encourage foreign funding into some of this where organizations want to engage in social impact. So I think the definition here becomes very important when we are able to categorize startups or organizations which are wanting to drive socio-economic impact rather than just economic impact, and place the purpose at some higher level and define it in that way. And one of the good ways is what Nishit Desai has suggested. What are the sustainable development goals that you are embracing through your organization, and can you show the outcomes and the related outcomes? And so an outcome oriented. We have now set up what we call as a DMEO within Niti Aayog. It is deployment monitoring and evaluation organization, because this becomes very important as to how are you measuring outcomes and how are you also linking them with policy changes that we can enable.
Okay, thank you. And just to be clear, when I talk about impact investing and impact businesses, we're talking about for-profit businesses. These are businesses that generate very strong returns for people. Of course, there's already regulation that allows funding to come to nonprofit impactful businesses, which are fantastic. But the potential for scale is so much greater there if you're investing into a business that both delivers impact as well as financial returns, which of course there's been lots of those that have done so. But again, in line with the example I gave earlier, the microfinance sector has grown into the many lakhs of crores, whereas another business that's proven to be just as robust in terms of repayments, say the SME finance business, has grown well, but not nearly as well because it's the property sector guidelines. And so I think coming to a definition is not difficult. People all over the world have defined impact investing and have defined impact businesses or social enterprises, whatever you want to call them, but it's getting the government to recognize them and then putting policies in place where it's tricky. I don't know, Dr. Ray, given that you're with the government, would you like to give some words on that? And then Karen, I saw you raise your hand. I'll have you speak after.
You see, I said I have, even at the risk of sounding ignorant, and I have to say that in very broad terms, we understand the importance of impact investing. I really don't know what specific issues are on the deck right now, so to say. But the message that I take back with me is that this is something in which there are best practices and policy to be followed from across the world, and the OECD presentation is going to help us in terms of understanding that. That's all I'd like to say now. I'm sorry if I've disappointed you, but that's what I'd limit myself to saying right now.
No problem at all. Karen, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what you said. I think definitions are very important. We, in our 2015 publication, had a whole chapter outlining the definition of impact investing, which went much deeper than the GIN definition, which is very broad. We got a lot of pushback at that time. People said, why are you trying to lock in and narrow what impact investing is? Let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let everything be called impact investing. But to your point, if you don't have some boundaries and some definitions, some parameters, then you can't set policy and you can't collect data. So what I would suggest is, it's not perfect, to have some clarity around what what are in the buckets of social impact investing and these impact businesses. And as you said, Eric, it's a very diverse landscape. You have all types of enterprises, from the nonprofit to the for-profit. Just like in the mainstream markets, you have all the SMEs, you also have the high-growth firms. And I found in my earlier work on venture capital, a lot of policymakers think that an enterprise is an enterprise, and it's not the case. So maybe there are multiple definitions about the players in the ecosystem, but I do think at least having initial boundaries that can be adjusted over time as the market learns is helpful for setting policy and collecting data.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I think that it's important to have that clarity, and you need to start somewhere, right? That any venture that you start, the most important measure of success is if you actually start, and then you've got a chance to do so. Deepak, I think you wanted to say something on this.
Yeah, Eric, just a quick point on this one. And first, I must say, I really like Ramanan's way of putting it. It's profit and, at the same point of time, that there has to be a social angle to it. There's a purpose to it. So purpose and profit. But a quick step back, and that is where I take it to what Karen was saying. In the mid-80s, I recollect the World Bank had started on its funding for projects, had started a concept called social IRR. What was the social return on a project? And I think over time, they did away with it. It's no longer happening again. It is important to have a clear definition because it gives you some kind of a direction and some kind of an evaluation. But at the same point of time, the danger of having very strict definitions is it brackets you into clear straitjackets. And that also would impact what is the state of evolution of that marketplace. I'll give you one quick example. Rohit Kashyap, a 19-year-old boy from Sitamhari in Bihar. I just shared a platform with him a few weeks ago. And Sitamhari is not one of the best known districts for industrialization or exposure, and nor is the state of Bihar. 19-year-old started his own startup called Maytree School. What he does is that he's got startups around in his village and district, and he helps them get connected to the world and helps them get mentorship. These are startups which could have agricultural impact, which will have social impact, which will have energy impact of all kinds. Why did it start? One was microfinance, which you said, but most importantly, it was because of the digitization drive of the government. That has brought about a system where there is democratization of access, there's democratization of information, and a marketplace for all these people. Now what is happening is creating that digital framework. What would you call that? That is my first element. The second, we are now on the world's largest water program. In the next 48 months, the Prime Minister said 600 million individuals will be having drinking water tap. It's the world's largest water program. There are all elements to it. Clearly impact investment. However, the person who's supplying a part which goes into a tap, is that impact investing? And knowing that his input is extremely critical to get that tap going. So what I'm saying is that the moment we get into a definition, this guy would be left out of it. Or the guy creating the digital framework, which is the most critical thing to getting that impact investment happening, may not fit into that bracket to begin with. But those are the things that comes at an evolution of a marketplace once it happens. And that's where I say the definitions need to be a little more fluid. I think that's what Karen was also alluding to, that you need to create that fluidity and flexibility to make that happen.
Yeah, thanks, Deepak. Completely agree. It'll certainly be an iterative process. It'd be shocking if it was done perfectly the first time, and the world changes, so we need to change with it. Nishit, you raised your finger as well.
Yeah, I think this is the most important part of the game, the definitional context. And while we need a degree of fluidity, I think we need a lot more clarity. And anytime you define anything, just apply design thinking as to how the lowest level administrator is going to apply that. Biggest difficulty is that we at our level understand a lot. He has no clue. He has to simply look at the definition and be able to apply as easily as possible. Even a common man on the street, the only way in which he can comply with law is by reading the text of the law, the language of the law. So I think we really need to simplify the definition. At the same time, it must be implementable at the administrative level, because one is a policy, other is procedure, and then we get a lot of difficulty. And the one way in which you define corruption is nothing else but discretion plus monopoly minus accountability is corruption. Okay, in later vein. So what happens when you give discretion and there is no accountability, and there is, you have to go through that process? Try to minimize that. Nobody can be 100% perfect, but definition, content, particularly impact, it could take you completely on a different level and can create a systemic issue as well on one side. On the other hand, it can create a systemic improvement in impact to a great extent. So we need to strike a good balance, but I would strongly recommend focusing a little more time on definitional context. And Karen, you mentioned about, and I went through your report, even though it came this morning, it was, as a lawyer, I'm used to be reading a lot of papers around, but it was very good. All that I'm trying to do is to narrow it down in a way so that at the lowest level, at the as you said, at the grassroots level, it can be applied more easily. And we'll be happy to work with you all, anytime you need any help. So I think definition is very critical, fortunately. Otherwise, what I say and what you hear will be completely different.
Correct. Yeah, having something easy to intuitively understand is critical for it really to be used rapidly.
I'll just add that easy to understand and easy to measure, because if you don't have the measure part of it, you go at the lower level, as Nishit Desai says. He's looking at, how do I judge that this is really, fitting the definition? And unless you have some sort of measurement in place, whatever it be, it becomes a little more clear.
Correct. Obviously, there's always people who are looking for better scams and whatnot, and so being able to measure and enforce and whatnot is critical.
The problem starts, that administrator and policymaker often starts on the note of distrust, especially in country like India, because he is always worried somebody will abuse whatever incentive I'm giving. Somebody will, manipulate the whole thing. So I will be held accountable, and that is why there is a need for, a little more clearer understanding. And of course, institutions like venture capital funds and others would hopefully play a more constructive role in this whole game. Impact investment.
Yeah. Great. I'd like to move on to another topic. I don't know, Rajat, if you'd like to comment. What incentives do you think that can be put in place really to get more? You talked about the importance of domestic capital, kind of leading and then being followed by foreign capital, which I think has probably happened less often historically here in the impact investing market as well as the mainstream private equity markets. What do you think can be done to incentivize that?
So a couple of things. I think, this particular COVID period has been a period where, there has been thoughtful investments. And if something like, if we can have, and I think that's probably been requested as well, that there should be an exemption which should be available with the investors for a period of time, right? So if something's been invested during this COVID period, they should, and it's on impact, then I think they are eligible to not to pay certain kind of long-term gain taxes, etc. So some of those aspects which can be done around there. Also, as a matter of fact, we put across around investments made by pension funds and LIC and banks, etc. So if those investments can come in and they can cater a small percentage specifically towards impact investment, just like they do for AIF investments, they could be a part of that structured specifically for impact investments. And maybe get together, the government has the fund of funds structures, right? So if you can have a fund of funds structure which is specifically looking at how we can help folks which are in the impact investment stage. So a couple of some of these thoughts. I'm happy to discuss it out.
Great. Thanks, Rajat. Gaurav, given that you do, kind of fund-to-fund investing amongst other things, and any thoughts on how we can move from kind of ideas to implementation and driving more capital, both domestic as well as foreign capital, to this space?
Absolutely. So there are several ways we can do it, and I really like the way Mr. Ramanathan was talking about purpose above profit, and then there is profit above purpose, and then there is profit and purpose, and all of this is quite important in many ways. People take it lightly, but we are quite privileged as DFID and FCDO now to have worked in India and with Indians, apex Indian institutions. So we've worked with, really early stages of grants. We've done early stage financing on investment, growth stage financing, tech financing, etc. So we're quite privileged because we have an exposure to India in doing these different kind of instruments. And we've also had exposure with different stages of businesses. So we work with incubators in the low income states in India, similar to what the Atal Mission does and some of the other sort of government funds do. That's one. Then we also work with angel funds, and we have supported the India Angel Network, for instance, where is our first stage of professional capital or angel money, and that's commercial capital in that sense. It's no longer grant. And then we work with MSMEs, and we work with India's apex DFIs like SBI, SIDBI, National Housing Bank, and on SDG thematic funds like the Green Growth Equity Fund with NIIF, which has the mandate to mobilize more international capital by when the two governments, Government of India and the British government, put anchor money in of about 240 million pounds, which is quite substantial. It was about catalyzing more international capital and more domestic capital in many ways into those sectors, which are thematic, as was said earlier. But I think, we all, need to do a little bit more as well. Now, we talked about COVID-19, and let me tell you our response in that sense. So we had funds, and, we looked for how development capital, as what we call it, and that is capital where purpose is above profit or at least profit, how it can be invested commercially to make an impact. And we looked at existing vehicles, and the AIF regulation, as Nishit buying, is actually quite good. But having said that, we already had existing funds with existing investors there. So we needed to see if one of the investors like us had a softer heart, a bigger heart in some ways, where somebody else, because of their investment mandate, was more firm. Could we go into the same vehicles? Putting money into India, like I said, has been a challenge. And, we've worked with Invest India, and we can take it offline about how to improve it. But because we were working with the State Bank of India in this instance, and State Bank of India is a trusted partner, and there is implicit trust that, whatever we are working with as a government ourselves, we don't have a profit motive. As State Bank of India, who is a fund manager, that we would do good for the sector. And we've come up with some innovation in terms of a new class of shares. For example, class X is what we are calling it, which will take a different risk return profile to support liquidity support to some of these companies in our portfolio. And that's something where we are working with SEBI regulator. And because of the fact that, some colleagues and panelists have said earlier, that the government is playing many roles. So it is also an investor, and because of its trusted bodies, there is implicit trust. I think we were able to get that through, or we are in the process of getting that through. But it's been a process where it does take all of us to come together. And I think trust and incentive, like Nishit Bhai was saying, it's very important to the regulator. And it is a symbiotic relationship, really. And the market participants need to do more from their perspective, because it's not just for the government or for the policymakers to just keep doling out incentives. And there has to be greater alignment of incentives. On that, again, I'll go back to what Mr. Ramanathan was saying. He talked about, how do you put an outcome focus into it? So let's look at it from a fund manager perspective and bring that perspective into this debate. Can the fund managers do more? Are there more innovative ways that they can structure and be rewarded as well by investors who are socially minded? Of course, the answer is yes. Has it been done in the market? Not much. Are there ways that it can be done? Yes, it can be done. And have we done it? We have. How have we done it? So there are fund managers that we work with, because as a government, value for money is important to us. We have also, as an input measure, translated 1/3 of the fees of the manager into, number of jobs that they can sort of deliver. And we have log frame targets that we've set upfront, which are over a 10-year horizon. And in the 10 years, we have, at the input level, some fees that is linked to that, 1/3, up to 1/3. That's quite a sizable number. And then in terms of their carry, just to make sure that the profit and purpose balance is again maintained, we've linked some of the carry to achievement of those outcomes in that sense. So, it's not just always about policymakers, but I think the market participants need to work really together, because as long as, it's a sophisticated industry. So as long as there are players like SBI, SIDBI, NIIF, us, Atal, Niti Aayog, Invest India, and all of us, if some of us can come together and create a spin, then, the pension fund industry, the HNIs, the domestic capital gets more confidence, because, they get to see that there is data, there is information, and there is less risk to them to be answerable to their stakeholders in some ways. So that's how the whole ecosystem can come together as well from our own experience of several decades in India. Thank you.
Thanks, Prabhav. I think that's quite helpful. I think that there is a huge role for people like DFID, and certainly in partnership with people like SBI and SIDBI and LIC, etc. It's interesting that you're kind of encouraging, and great that you're encouraging people to be more creative and align incentives. I know as someone who's raising a fund right now, we get told again and again, keep it plain vanilla, keep it simple. If you do a complex structure, you may find one person, but everyone else will move you back to that. And so I think if you can get some of these bigger players to agree to things that align incentives, hopefully others can follow. I don't know. Nishit, I see you raising your finger, and then after that we have a number of audience questions. So please go ahead.
I think very quickly, apart from, as I said, I think philanthropy and CSR, if you can quickly streamline, a lot of pool will come into the play. Number two is outcome funding and the regulatory sandbox. I think we should really encourage that, because we've spent about 500 hours on just trying to put together outcome funding. But so many regulatory and tax issues are there, we are not able to resolve them, and therefore everything is sitting duck for last 2 years, right? But if we can have quick resolution through sandbox regime, at least that will give us a lot of leeway. So I think let us encourage that part. In fact, SEBI, RBI, I think GIFT City, we've been working on. Everyone has sandbox, but we have not really taken it to the next level. If we allow that, we'll experiment a lot, and even if we fail, the impact is confined to a particular lab kind of thing. And I personally think if Silicon Valley is the hub for technological innovation, I think India is a hub for social innovations and impact innovations.
Yeah, I think that's right. India is the hub and the sandbox for innovation. We just have a much bigger market on which to experiment, and lots of creative leaders as well. And outcome funding is something that's gotten a lot of attention around the world, and lots of things have been done, but of course it's still like massive room for scaling it up, and India is the best place to do that. Now,
if I may just add something here. The Atmanirbhar Bharat framework actually provides a great framework for us to define impact investing in a much more concrete manner. Let me just elaborate on that. I mean, first part is, the Prime Minister identified 5 pillars, which goes to make Atmanirbhar Bharat. And that was first the demographic dividend pillar that he talked about, where education is so important, job creation is so important. Creating a nation of job creators is very important. So it is all about the educational infrastructure, how you're going to enable in the remotest parts of the country our people to get education and to be able to get the benefits of education, and that to job enabling education. Second was the pillar of infrastructure that he talked about, that how do you improve the infrastructure in the country, and what element of investing is going towards the improvement of infrastructure, whether it is physical infrastructure, smart infrastructure, water management, housing, affordable housing in all these aspirational districts, electricity management and so on. And how are you facilitating? You may be pursuing a profitable enterprise and a venture in any of these, but what aspect of this can be generating the impact from a social point of view. And an example is, for example, if you're saying that I'm going to be building this huge technology park, but thereby also enabling so much of job creation, so much of education, so much of water management, or so much of affordable housing in that area, you are able to give some outcome orientation and measurement orientation towards that. Third is the pillar of demand he talked about. Now the demand, there are demand for enterprises which is purely from a profit point of view, and we want to encourage that because economic growth needs to be there. But there is another portion of the demand which is all social, filling the gap, bridging the economic divide, or bridging the digital divide, or bridging the educational divide. So what impact of that demand is being fulfilled? And then he talked about the pillar of socio-economic growth, and that's where all these rural financing, microfinancing schemes and all of those come in. And finally, pillar of technology. How are we using technology for fulfilling any one of this? And if you are investing in technology and innovation to be able to address any of these pillars of Atmanirbhar Bharat, I think it provides a framework for us, and it may be worth deliberating on how do we carve out from here what can go into and define very concretely the impact investing. Waste management, for example, you're building, what steps are you taking through your organization in the pursuit of whatever you're doing? I mean, many IT companies are building huge facilities because they're growing. But what impact are they attributing to waste management in and around that area? And that sort of thing can, I don't know how, I mean, it's at a very broad level, but I think it provides a great framework for us to be able to define in a better manner what impact investing can do and the outcomes of that.
Thank you, Mr. Ramanathan. Yeah, I think that definition is very important. Obviously, it'd be a legal one, but it's very important to have that serving underserved populations, inclusion and whatnot. I think will be a big part of it. But that specificity is important. We have received a number of questions. One I'd love to get some views on is someone has asked what incentives could be provided to support the impact ecosystem and specifically support impact entrepreneurs to scale their businesses. Anyone keen to jump in on that one? What can be done to support specifically impact entrepreneurs?
I'll take that question. I think I tried to answer that earlier through whatever I shared. But what is missing also is a very strong public-private sector partnership in the startup world. I think the COVID-19 has actually been a revealing moment, I would say, like the Y2K phenomenon that happened. The Y2K phenomenon opened up India's startup, IT capability to the rest of the world. It was a simple phenomenon. It required a simple problem to be solved, but it suddenly opened up the huge capability that India had in being an IT service provider for the rest of the world. Similarly, this COVID-19 movement has brought to, I think, very strong light the role startups are playing in being able to solve many problems, which are not just social problems, but also other problems that India has. And I think the 55,000 startups that we are talking about in India, not everybody is successful, of course, but it has awakened the private sector world into this power of the startup world and the need to support them. And thereby, I think there has to be, one is the CSR angle, which is being strengthened by the government. But we need to see how we can incentivize beyond the CSR. That private sector plays an important role in supporting startups and entrepreneurs who are involved in social impact and social innovation and so on. So I think incentivization on that is very important, and there needs to be some deliberation on how we can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Ramanan. I think Deepak, you want to add something?
I just want to, make an announcement here for the audience. Our next session, which is next scheduled, will start in Auditorium 1. This is just for the information of the audience. Thank you.
Eric, just wanted to add on to what Ramanan was saying. Basically, on what is it being given as incentives to startups. I'll give you a few examples, which is being done via policy. One is obviously the entire funding, financing piece of it. We have this huge fund, which is funding another funds, which is only for startups, and there's a multiplier factor there. Second, very interestingly, is getting them government access to public procurement. I'll give you a small instance, and Nishit is there. There used to be a clause that if you're applying for anything where the government procurement is happening, you needed to have X numbers of experience or a market experience supplying to any other government entity. That has been removed. So a number of such incentives and push factors have already been brought in. And please remember, government procurement still remains a very important element within the Indian economic structure. And now with the Atmanirbhar Bharat coming in with all these local solutions to issues, they are all going to be getting preference. So from that perspective, there is a lot which is already being done on that side. That's back to you, Eric.
Great. Thank you, Deepak. I think that's quite important. Gaurav, you want to say something on this as well?
So just to say from an investor perspective, I think it's important to know the ABC of it, right? It is be aware of when are the call for proposals coming, who are the key players, and how is your proposition fitting into what the investor community and where the funding is, and what kind of funding do you need? So that's one. Second is, B is for business model. Like other colleagues have said, COVID-19 is a fundamental change in terms of how it's going. So how can your business model use technology, reduce services, be a step different from the current status quo? And what is your transforming ability in your business model? That's the B. And C is the capability, because a lot of times we've seen investors who are just one or two people wanting money from investors and fund managers, but they don't really have the capability to manage the money and deliver it and deliver the returns if that's what they're seeking in terms of impact. So I think a simple ABC model like that would be helpful.
Thanks, Gaurav. I think it's always useful to have those frameworks. Another question we received from the audience is, do you see social impact bonds and development impact bonds and other focused financial instruments becoming mainstream? What level of policy support do you envision would be required for that? I don't know, Nishit, Karen, Rajat, anyone want to jump in on that?
Definitely, there is scope for every different type of instrument, but the regulatory framework is such that it makes it somewhat difficult at times to play with this instrument. As I mentioned, that if we can expedited process in the sandbox regime, that will allow us to experiment. But if the sandbox regime takes long time for approvals and all that thing, that would be very difficult. But I would think that there's so much, as was said, in case of outcome fund, for example, or other ones, there is huge opportunity, and there is already money sitting there. It's just doing nothing, So I don't think today it's a supply side as far as money is concerned is a shortage. It's also how you deploy them and where to deploy is a issue. So if there are good entrepreneurs with good model, there is an opportunity, especially in the context of the domestic investor. It can open up more easily. If bonds are to be issued to the foreign parties in dollar terms, then it becomes a little trickier. We might want to make some changes on that, but I think there is a scope for both the risk instrument, the equity, debt, also mix of that, and there are a lot of financial structuring that can be done and that can tail along with the business models, as Gaurav mentioned. Sometimes we don't give enough importance to business models, and you open up capacity. Now that itself is a big social impact, right? Airbnb, Uber, they are innovative not for any other reason, but they opened up capacity that was little. And same way, in fact, pandemic provides this huge opportunity. I think Mumbai has become one of the least polluted cities, especially in some parts of Mumbai, And we thought, it was lower than Palo Alto. Okay. So I think that if we can create some models where, all these financial instruments, there is a lot of opportunity in financial services sector, and which can manage risk and it can benefit people, and sure.
Great. Thanks, Nisith. I know Gaurav has to leave, and we'll be wrapping up in a minute here, but thank you, Gaurav.
Thank you.
Yeah. Karen, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, just very briefly, we saw in the mapping that we did that social impact bonds, development impact bonds, outcome funds, this was really a huge area of growth, and it's continued to grow since then. So many countries are experimenting at the domestic level, but also for international cooperation. But to the point made earlier, we really need a range of different instruments. SIBs are not always the easiest to implement. There are different models, different approaches. So we're still in learning mode. So hopefully there'll be new instruments developed, new business models developed. Everything is open. We need more innovation in this space. A lot of opportunity.
No.
At least the government has talked about social stock exchange, and I think the finance minister mentioned about that in her parliament speech. And I think that would be a very good platform to be able to encourage and see how that can shape up, because it can, if conceived well, and I think there needs to be deliberation by the industry along with the government on this. It can become a great platform for enabling this.
Yeah, I think obviously innovation is something that needs to be constant. And while capitalism has brought lots of benefits to people all over the world, it's also brought lots of challenges. And so, the idea of impact investing, it seems intuitively good. You can both have strong financial returns and strong financial impacts. And if you can have similar financial returns to what you can in mainstream businesses, who wouldn't want to do it? And similarly, I think if you can kind of define these social impact bonds and development impact bonds and have similar returns naturally and really measure it rigorously, it's something that should have a lot of legs. Dr. Ray, there's this question specifically for you. It said, what policy initiatives can we drive from a foreign policy side to showcase India as an example of innovative impact investing solutions?
So the Prime Minister is actually one of the things that, and our Minister both are think that the current moment that in which we have faced facing the fallout of the pandemic is, as my colleague from the Planning Commission from Niti Aayog said, it's something like a Y2K moment. It's a moment of opportunity for India. Every crisis is followed by a period of growth. That's empirically, that's what the record says. And this too will be followed by a path of growth. What exactly is it that we are going to grow in? I think that like in the Y2K, in the aftermath of Y2K, there will be Indian models that will come up of, either ingrown either models that grew in India or models that were adapted to India, which will have a broader relevance in international scenario. We have tools like our Development Partnership Administration, which actually can be used to spread the word of whatever we have done well amongst our friends. I think that the upside of this, when it comes to sharing experiences, sharing ideas, is quite considerable. Our Development Partnership Administration is present in all continents. I think we have operations in something like 60 or 70 countries. The number keeps growing. Just to give you an idea of the kind of reach that we have, we exported medicines and medical supplies to more than 100 countries while the lockdown was on. So that gives you an idea of our ambition and our willingness and ability to be a force for good in the world. And I'm sure that this space will come up with ideas and with practices which by which we can contribute. The Prime Minister has come up speaks of this concept of human-centric globalization, and this is an opportunity for us to actually put the man at the bottom or the woman at the bottom of the pyramid in the center scope of our foreign policy. Thanks.
Yep. I think the leadership vacuum globally does present a huge opportunity for India. Nishit, you wanted to say something?
Just in letter vein, I think we should continue with pandemic lockdown. Pandemic should be eliminated, but lockdown should be continued so we have better, less pollution. And I think if you measure in quarters, you will find a lot more gross happiness because now we are able to spend more time with family, we are able to do exercise, we are able to balance our diet, lifestyle is simpler. We are doing so many unnecessary things, and perhaps it has taught us a lot of things, while at the same time we sympathize for those who are trapped in the pandemic. But I think the measurement of lifestyle and the quality of life is equally important. I think some point in time we should look at GHP from GDP.
Right. We've run over time, and I don't know, maybe that's a nice note on which to end on, and everyone focusing on their happiness during these challenging times. I don't know if anyone has any other dying words they want to get into before we wrap things up to allow the next session to start. Great. Well, thank you all very much. You've been a fantastic panel. As a moderator, you often try to get the people who won't shut up to listen, and the ones who talk to, and the ones who listen too much to talk. But you've all been very balanced in your talking, and I think shared a lot of good wisdom. This is an area of critical importance, and so look forward to all of us working together with the audience members as well to turn this into a reality and really help make the policy changes necessary to put in place the proper incentives. So thank you all, and of course thanks very much to IIC as well as to of course our sponsors Invest India and IBCA. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Eric, and
Thank you.
yeah, really a pleasure to have all of you here. We hope that we will be able to, loop back with some of you on some of these action points more by way of, doing things in future and collaborating in future, and we'll touch back with all of you. So thanks. On this note, I think I'd like to close this session, and for the audience, we can go now to the OD1 for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.